The history of Greek mythology. In the beginning was the idea, nothing more than a concept in the mind of man. No sky, no earth, just an infinite void of nothingness called chaos. But from this primordial darkness came Gaia, the personification of the earth, and Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the embodiment of the sky. Together, they created the first generation of Titans. Now, it's important to note that these stories didn't start out as a history lesson. They were simply myths used by the ancient Greeks to explain the world around them. And from this watery abyss rose the goddess Gaia, who alone possessed the power of self-creation. She was the first being born of the void, the first speck of order in a universe consumed by chaos. Soon enough, she gave birth to the first of the Olympians, the gods of the new generation. And the most powerful of these new gods was Zeus. Meanwhile, Uranus's severed genitals, upon hitting the sea, produced foam that eventually coalesced into the figure of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love. But to the ancient Greeks, this was how the world began. Why the sky and earth were separated and how the gods took control of the universe. These stories weren't just fantastical tales, they were an attempt to comprehend the world around them. For example, the sun's journey across the sky could be explained by the myth of Helios driving his chariot across the heavens each day. Another well-known myth is the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, which takes place in the legendary labyrinth. Greek mythology is also home to some of the most iconic monsters in history, such as the Hydra, the Chimera, and the Sphinx. Many of the stories and characters have been adapted and reinterpreted in modern works of art, literature, and film. Many people choose to name their children after the gods and heroes of Greek mythology, such as Zeus, Hera, Apollo, Artemis, Athena, and Achilles. There are even names inspired by the monsters and villains of these myths, such as Hades, Medusa, and Lucifer. For example, the story of Romeo and Juliet is a modern retelling of the Greek myth of Pyramus and Thisbe. And the character of Frankenstein's monster is said to be inspired by the Greek myth of Prometheus, who was chained to a mountain and had his liver eaten by an eagle every day as punishment for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to the humans. These creatures were often depicted as having multiple heads, bodies and wings, reflecting the Greeks' fascination with hybrid creatures. And the changing seasons could be attributed to the goddess. Demeter's grief over her daughter's abduction by Hades. Whether you're interested in the stories, the characters, or the lessons they teach, there's always something new to discover. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to dive into this rich and ancient tradition and see what treasures you can find. With the old order of the Titans overthrown and the younger gods victorious, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide the cosmos among them. For instance, the story of Pandora and her jar illustrates the consequences of curiosity and disobedience. The Greeks loved to put on theatrical performances featuring scenes from their myths. These plays were not only a form of entertainment, but also a way to honor the gods and to contemplate important philosophical questions. In fact, some of them were incredibly intelligent and even spoke in riddles. One of the most famous examples is the Sphinx, who posed riddles to travelers and devoured those who failed to answer correctly. Another example is the Chimera, a creature with the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a tail of a snake. Despite its monstrous appearance, the Chimera was known for its intelligence and cunning. Similarly, the myth of Icarus and his father Daedalus serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the importance of listening to one's elders. Zeus received the sky and the earth, Poseidon, the seas, and Hades, the underworld. Gaia, in her solitude, longed for a companion, and so without aid or consort, she engaged in a cosmic act of self-impregnation and gave birth to Uranus, the personification of the sky. Together, Gaia and Uranus mated and produced the first generation of deities known as the Titans. They were colossal in size and boundless in their power, living up to their name, which translates to the strong ones. Among them were Cronus, Rhea, Atlas, Prometheus, and the monstrous Typhon. For example, their creation story may have originally been a way to explain the phenomena of day and night. You see, when he and Gaia came together, their union produced not only children, but also their own deformities, creatures born of the shadows that lurked in the darkest corners of the universe. Fearing the immense power these creatures possessed, Uranus made a terrible decision. He decided to keep his youngest son, Cronus, trapped within his mother's womb. This act of hubris, however, was met with the wrath of Gaia. Furious at her husband's actions, Gaia reached out to her son Cronus and whispered her plan for revenge. She urged him to rise up against his father and overthrow his tyrannical rule. Armed with a sickle forged by Gaia, Cronus freed himself from his prison within his mother's womb and ambushed his father. In a fit of rage and vengeance, Cronus castrated his father, hurling his severed genitals into the churning waters below. Since the ancient Greeks never had any written language, they passed their stories down orally through bards and poets. This tradition eventually ended with the great poet Homer, whose oral poems about the Greeks' greatest heroes and their adventures formed the basis for what we now know as Greek mythology. The most powerful of these titans was Cronus, who led a rebellion against his father, Uranus, castrating him and throwing his severed genitals into the sea. And if you want to know more about them, then you've come to the right place. Because now we're going to take a deep dive into this world of ancient adventure. The blood that spilled from the wound dripped onto Gaia, and she became pregnant with the first of the Olympians, the god of the sea, Poseidon. Poseidon would go on to conquer the seas for the Olympians, while his brother Hades drew lots to receive the underworld as his domain. But it was Zeus who inherited his father's title as king of the cosmos. After defeating the Titans in a 10-year war, during the war, Zeus was imprisoned by his father on the island of Crete, but he was saved by his brother Hades and lover Persephone and taken to safety. It was there on Mount Ida that the gods chose the young hero named Paris as the most handsome man alive. So began the Trojan War, which ended with the destruction of Troy. But let's rewind a bit. Let's go back to those early days when Zeus and his siblings ruled over a Greece filled with monsters and mayhem. Now, Greek mythology is a rich tapestry of tales involving a vast array of gods, heroes, and monsters. When the universe first began, all that existed was a great chasm full of darkness and water. However, Uranus had a dark secret, a hidden truth that threatened the very balance of the cosmos. As the blood from Uranus's wounds fell upon Gaia, she felt herself become pregnant once more. And now we return to our regularly scheduled program. Now, this might sound like a pretty messed up story to be told to kids, and you'd be right. These myths also served as a way to teach moral lessons. Now, Greek mythology wasn't just about explaining the world or teaching lessons. It was also a source of great entertainment. One of the most famous Greek myths is, of course, the story of Perseus, who killed the Gorgon Medusa. But despite their many heads and terrifying appearance, these monsters were not just mindless beasts. Now, Greek mythology has had a lasting impact on Western culture. Another influence of Greek mythology can be seen in the realm of names. Greek mythology is a fascinating subject that continues to captivate people all over the world. Thank you for watching.